Final Fantasy X is a role-playing video game developed and published by Squaresoft as the 10th entry in the Final Fantasy series, originally released in 2001 for Sony's PlayStation 2. The game was re-released as a high-definition port for the PlayStation 3 and PlayStation Vita on March 18, 2014, under the name Final Fantasy X X2 HD Remaster. It was also re-released for the PlayStation 4 in May 2015. The game marks the Final Fantasy series' transition from entirely pre-rendered backdrops to fully three-dimensional areas, and is also the first in the series to feature voice acting. Final Fantasy X replaces the active time battle system with the conditional turn-based battle system, and uses a new leveling system called the Sphere Grid. Set in the fantasy world of Spyro, the game's story revolves around a group of adventurers and the quest to defeat a rampaging monster known as Sin. The player character is Tidus, a blitzball star who finds himself in Spyro after his home city of Zanarkand is destroyed by Sin. Shortly after arriving to Spyro, Tidus joins the Summoner Unit on her pilgrimage to destroy Sin. Development of Final Fantasy X began in 1999, with a budget of more than $32.3 million and a team of more than 100 people. The game was the first in the main series not entirely scored by Nobuo Uematsu. Masashi Hamauzu and Junya Nakano were signed as Uematsu's fellow composers. Final Fantasy X was both a critical and commercial success, selling over 6.6 million units worldwide. On March 3, 2003, it was followed by Final Fantasy X2, making it the first Final Fantasy game to have a direct game sequel. In October 2013, Square Enix announced Final Fantasy X and its sequel Final Fantasy X2 have together sold over 14 million copies worldwide on PlayStation 2. Gameplay. Like previous games in the series, Final Fantasy X is presented in a third-person perspective, with players directly navigating the main character, Tidus, around the world to interact with objects and people. Unlike previous games, however, the world and town maps have been fully integrated, with terrain outside of cities rendered to scale. When an enemy is encountered, the environment switches to a turn-based battle area where characters and enemies await their turn to attack. The gameplay of Final Fantasy X differs from that of previous Final Fantasy games in its lack of a top-down perspective world map. Earlier games featured a miniature representation of the expansive areas between towns and other distinct locations, used for long-distance traveling. In Final Fantasy X, almost all the locations are essentially continuous and never fade out to a world map. Regional connections are mostly linear, forming a single path through the game's locations, though an airship becomes available late in the game, giving the player the ability to navigate Spyro faster. Like previous games in the series, Final Fantasy X features numerous mini-games, most notably the fictional underwater sport, Blitzball. Combat. Final Fantasy X introduces the conditional turn-based battle system in place of the series' traditional active time battle system first used in Final Fantasy IV. Whereas the ATB concept features real-time elements, the CTB system is a turn-based format that pauses the battle during each of the player's turns. Thus, the CTB design allows the player to select an action without time pressure. A graphical timeline along the upper right side of the screen details who will be receiving turns next, and how various actions taken will affect the subsequent order of turns. The player can control up to 3 characters in battle, though a swapping system allows the player to replace them with a character outside the active party at any time. Limit breaks. Highly damaging special attacks reappear in Final Fantasy X as overdrives. In this new incarnation of the feature, most of the techniques are interactive, requiring button inputs to increase their effectiveness. While initially the overdrives can be used when the character receives a significant amount of damage, The player is able to modify the requirements to unlock them. Final Fantasy X introduces an overhaul of the summoning system employed in previous games of the series. Whereas in previous titles a summoned creature would arrive, perform one action, and then depart, the Eons of Final Fantasy X arrive and entirely replace the battle party, fighting in their place until either the Eon wins the battle, is defeated itself, or is dismissed by the player. Eons have their own statistics, commands, special attacks, spells, and overdrives. The player acquires 5 Eons over the course of the game, but 3 additional Eons can be obtained by completing various side quests. Sphere Grid. As with previous titles in the series, players have the opportunity to develop and improve their characters by defeating enemies and acquiring items, though the traditional experience point system is replaced by a new system called the Sphere Grid. Instead of characters gaining predetermined statistic bonuses for their attributes after leveling up, each character gains sphere levels after collecting enough ability points. Sphere levels allow players to move around the Sphere Grid, a predetermined grid of interconnected nodes consisting of various statistic and ability bonuses. Spheres are applied to these nodes, unlocking its function for the selected character. The Sphere Grid system also allows players to fully customize characters in contrast to their intended battle roles, such as turning the White Mage role Yuna into a physical powerhouse and the Swordsman Auron into a healer. The International and PAL versions of the game include an optional, expert version of the Sphere Grid. In these versions, all of the characters start in the middle of the grid and may follow whichever path the player chooses. As a trade-off, the expert grid has fewer nodes in total, thus decreasing the total statistic upgrades available during the game, but with the same result in the end game, since every single core attribute can be maxed efficiently, giving the illusion of customization, but nothing relevant is concrete. Plot, setting and characters. Final Fantasy X is set in the fictional world of Spira, consisting of one large landmass divided into 3 subcontinents, surrounded by small tropical islands. It features diverse climates, ranging from the tropical Bersed and Kilika Islands, to the temperate Mayan region, to the frigid Makayania and Mount Gagazet areas. Although predominantly populated by humans, Spira features a variety of races. Among them are the Albhed, a technologically advanced but disenfranchised subgroup of humans with distinctive green eyes and unique language. The Guado are less human in appearance, with elongated fingers and other arboreal features. Still less human are the lion-like Ronsa and the frog-like Hypolo. A subset of Spira's sentient races are the unsent, the strong-willed spirits of the dead that remain in corporeal form. In Spira, the dead who are not sent to the far plane by a summoner come to envy the living and transform into fiends. Other fauna in Spira, aside from those drawn from real animals, such as cats, dogs, birds, and butterflies, include the gigantic, amphibious Shupifs, and the emu-like Chocobo, which appears in most Final Fantasy games. Spira is very different from the mainly European-style worlds found in previous Final Fantasy games, being much more closely modeled on Southeast Asia, most notably with respect to vegetation, topography, architecture, and names. There are 7 main playable characters in Final Fantasy X, starting with Tidus, a cheerful young teenager and a star blitzball player from Zanarkand, who seeks a way home after an encounter with Sin transported him to Spira. To do so, he joins Yuna, a summoner, on a journey to obtain the final Eon and defeat the enormous whale-like Sin. Journeying with the Kimara Ronsa, a young warrior of the Ronsa tribe who watched over Yuna during her childhood, Waka, a blitzball player whose younger brother was killed by Sin, and Lulu, a stoic black mage close to Yuna and Waka. During the journey, they are joined by Auron, a former warrior monk. who worked with both Tidus and Yuna's fathers to defeat Sin 10 years prior, and Riku, Yuna's cousin, a perky albhed girl and the first friendly person Tidus meets upon arriving in Spira. The story begins with the main protagonist, Tidus, waiting with his allies outside the ruins of an ancient city. Tidus narrates the events that led to the present, spanning most of the game's storyline. It begins in Tidus's home city, the high-tech metropolis of Zanarkand, where he is a renowned star of the underwater sport Blitzball. During a Blitzball tournament, the city is attacked by an immense creature which Orin, a man not originally from Zanarkand, calls Sin. Sin destroys Zanarkand, taking Tidus and Orin to the world of Spira. Upon arriving in Spira, Tidus is rescued by albhed salvages in the area. Upon asking him where he is from, one of them, Riku, tells him that Sin destroyed Zanarkand 1,000 years ago. After Sin attacks again, Tidus is separated from the divers and drifts to the tropical island of Besaid, where he meets Waka, captain of the local Blitzball team. Waka introduces Tidus to Yuna, a young summoner about to go on a pilgrimage to obtain the final Eon and defeat Sin with her guardians Lulu and Kimara. Meanwhile, Tidus joins to help Waka in the upcoming Blitzball tournament to find a way back home. The party travels across Spira to gather Eons, defending against attacks by Sin and its offspring, fiends called Sinspawn. After the tournament, they are joined by Orin, who convinces Tidus to become Yuna's guardian. He reveals to Tidus that Yuna's father, Lord Braska, Tidus's father, Jekt, and himself made the same pilgrimage to defeat Sin 10 years ago. Tidus thought his father had died at sea 10 years earlier. Following another attack from Sin, they are joined by Riku, later revealed to be Yuna's cousin. When the party arrives in the city of Guado Salam, the leader of the Guado, Seymour Guado, proposes to Yuna, saying that it will ease Spira's sorrow. At Makayania Temple, the group sees a message from Seymour's father Jaskal, who declares he was killed by his son, who now aims to destroy Spira. The group reunites with Yuna to engage Seymour in battle, killing him. Soon afterward, Sin attacks, separating Yuna from the others. While searching for her on Bacchanal Island, the homeland of the albhed where they had surfaced, Tidus has an emotional breakdown when he learns that summoners die after summoning the final Eon, leading to his desire to find a way to defeat Sin while keeping Yuna alive. The group finds Yuna in Bevel, where she is being forced to marry the unsent Seymour. They crash the wedding and escape with Yuna. The group is captured at the Bevel Temple, and are ordered to stand trial. After escaping from their sentence, the group heads towards the ruins of Zanarkand, seen in the introduction of the game. On the way there, Tidus learns that he, Jekt, and the Zanarkand hail from a summoned entities akin to Eons based on the original Zanarkand and its people. Long ago, the original Zanarkand battled Bevel in a Machina war, in which the former was defeated. Zanarkand's survivors became faiths so that they could use their memories of Zanarkand to create a new city in their image, removed from the reality of Spira. 1,000 years after its creation, the Faith have become exhausted from dreaming their Zanarkand, but are unable to stop due to Sin's influence. Once they reach Zanarkand, Yuna Leskar, the first summoner to defeat Sin and unsent ever since, tells the group that the final Eon is created from the faith of one close to the summoner. After defeating Sin, the final Eon kills the summoner and transforms into a new Sin, which has caused its cycle of rebirth to continue. Yuna decides against using the final Eon, due to the futile sacrifices it carries and the fact that Sin would still be reborn. Disappointed by their resolution, Yuna Leskar tries to kill Tidus group, but she is defeated and vanishes, ending hope of ever attaining the final Eon. After the fight, the group learns that Yu Yevon, a summoner who lost his humanity and mind, is behind Sin's cycle of rebirth. This leads the group to infiltrate Sin's body to battle Seymour and Jekt's imprisoned spirits. With Sin's hosts defeated, Tidus group battles and defeats Yevon. Sin's cycle of rebirth ends, and the spirits of Spyro's fate are freed from their imprisonment. Auron, revealed to be unsent, goes to the far plane, having died years ago after confronting Unalescar. Just then, Dreams Anarchan and Tidus disappear, now that the freed faith stopped the summoning. Afterward, in a speech to the citizens of Spyro, Una resolves to help rebuild their world now that it is free of sin. In a post-credits scene, Tidus awakens underwater. He then swims towards the ocean's surface, and the screen fades to white. Development. Final Fantasy X's development began in 1999, costing approximately 4 billion yen with a crew of over 100 people, most of whom worked on previous games in the series. Executive producer Hironobu Sakaguchi has stated that although he had concerns about the transition from 2D to 3D backgrounds, the voice acting, and the transition to real-time storytelling, the success of the Final Fantasy series can be attributed to constantly challenging the development team to try new things. Producer Yoshinori Kitase was also the chief director of Final Fantasy X, while the direction of events, maps and battles was split up between Motomu Toriyama, Takayoshi Nakazato and Toshiro Sukadai, respectively. The development of the script for the game took 3 to 4 months, with the same amount of time dedicated to the voice recording afterwards. Kazushika Nojima collaborated with Daisuke Watanabe, Toriyama and Kitase on writing the scenario for Final Fantasy X. Nojima was particularly concerned with establishing a connection in the relationship between player and main character. Thus, he penned the story such that the players progress through the world and growing knowledge about it is reflected in Tidus' own understanding in narration. Influences. Character designer Tetsuya Nomura has identified the South Pacific, Thailand and Japan as major influences on the cultural and geographic design of Spyro, particularly concerning the geographic location of the southern Besedinkalika Islands. He has also said that Spyro deviates from the worlds of past Final Fantasy games in the level of detail incorporated, something he has expressed to have made a conscious effort to maintain during the design process. Kitase felt that if the setting went back to a medieval European fantasy, it would not seem to help the development team advance. While he was thinking of different world environments, Nojima suggested a fantasy world that incorporated Asian elements. Sub-character chief designer Fuma Nakashima's focus was to ensure that characters from different regions and cultures bore distinctive characteristics in their clothing styles, so that they could be quickly and easily identified as members of their respective subgroups. For example, she has said that the masks and goggles of the Albhed give the group a strange and eccentric appearance, while the attire of the Ronsa lend to them being able to easily engage in battle. Design. Final Fantasy X features innovations in the rendering of characters' facial expressions, achieved through motion capture and skeletal animation technology. This technology allowed animators to create realistic lip movements, which were then programmed to match the speech of the game's voice actors. Nojima has revealed that the inclusion of voice acting enabled him to express emotion more powerfully than before, and he was therefore able to keep the storyline simple. He also said that the presence of voice actors led him to make various changes to the script, in order to match the voice actors' personalities with the characters they were portraying. The inclusion of voice, however, led to difficulties, with the game's cutscenes already programmed around the Japanese voice work. The English localization team faced the difficulty of establishing English-oriented dialogue and the obstacle of incorporating this modified wording with the rhythm and timing of the characters' lip movements. Localization specialist Alexander O. Smith described the process of fitting natural-sounding English speech into the game as something akin to writing 4 or 5 movies' worth of dialogue entirely in haiku form, and, of course, the actors had to act, and act well, within those restraints. The game was initially going to feature online elements, offered through Square's Play Online service. The features, however, were dropped during production, and online gaming would not become part of the Final Fantasy series until Final Fantasy XI. Map director Nakazato wanted to implement a world map concept with a more realistic approach than that of the traditional Final Fantasy game, in line with the realism of the game's 3D backgrounds, as opposed to pre-rendered backgrounds. As a player of the games in the Final Fantasy series, battle director Sukadai wanted to recreate elements he found interesting or entertaining, which eventually led to the removal of the active time battle system, and instead incorporated the strategy-focused conditional turn-based battle system. Originally, Final Fantasy X was going to feature wandering enemies visible on the field map, seamless transitions into battles, and the option for players to move around the landscape during enemy encounters. Battle art director Shintaro Takai has explained that it was his intention that battles in Final Fantasy X come across as a natural part of the story, and not an independent element. However, due to hardware limitations, this idea was not used. Instead, a compromise was made, whereby some transitions from the field map to the battle map were made relatively seamless with the implementation of a motion blur effect that would happen at the end of an event scene. The desire for seamless transitions also led to the implementation of the new summoning system seen in the game. Kites has explained that the purpose behind the sphere grid is to give players an interactive means of increasing their characters' attributes, such that they will be able to observe the development of those attributes firsthand.